It all started the night before, with hunger. The kind of hunger that gnaws at you, that makes your stomach feel like an empty drum being beaten by a restless child. It had been a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were always the worst days for Ameka at the office. It was the day Mr. Adebayor, his boss, liked to review all the accounts from the previous week. Mr. Adebayor was a man who believed that shouting made numbers align better. So from 9 in the morning until past 8 at night, Ameka had been swimming in a sea of invoices, receipts, and the loud, booming voice of his boss, pointing out every tiny mistake. He had missed lunch, surviving only on 2 stale meat pies a colleague had offered him, and a bottle of lukewarm water. When he finally left the office at 10 p.m., the city of Port Hawkut was still alive, but it was a tired kind of life. The traffic was not the monster it was during the day, but it was still a lazy snake slithering slowly through the streets. Ameka sat in his Toyota Corolla, his head leaning against the headrest, his stomach making loud, unhappy noises. He called Funke. "Hello, my love," she had said, her voice warm and sleepy. "Are you on your way?" "Yes, Funke, I just left the office now. This Adebayor man wants to kill me." She sighed. "Sorry, my dear. I know how he is. I kept your food for you, but it's late, oh. I couldn't stay awake." "Don't worry, I'm coming. Just wanted to hear your voice." He drove on, his mind picturing the plate of iba and a goosey soup waiting for him. But as he got closer to his street, a dreadful thought hit him. He remembered Funke mentioning that morning that the gas cylinder was empty. She had wanted to refill it, but the place she usually went to had run out of gas. This meant the soup would be cold. And there was no light. The whole neighborhood was in darkness. A common problem they all called NEPA has taken the light. The generator was faulty. The mechanic was supposed to have fixed it last weekend, but never showed up. The thought of eating cold iba and cold agusi soup made his already angry stomach twist in protest. He needed something hot, something savory, something to reward him for the terrible day he had endured. That's when the idea hit him. Suya! Hot, spicy, smoky suya, dripping with oil and covered in a generous dusting of pepper. It was the perfect late-night food. There was a popular suya spot not too far from his house, run by a man named Ibrahim, who knew his order by heart. "Oga Ameka," Ibrahim would say with a wide grin. "Extra pepper, no onions, just the way you like it." The thought made my mouth water. I turned the car in the direction of Ibrahim's spot. But when I got there, the place was dark. The familiar glow of the coals and the tall, thin shape of Ibrahim were missing. A woman selling roasted corn nearby saw my car slow down. "He no come today, oh," she shouted, pointing at the empty stand. "Him wife born Pekin yesterday." I felt a wave of disappointment. I was about to give up and go home to my cold soup when I saw it. Further down the road, at a corner I usually ignored, there was a faint reddish glow. It was another suya spot. I had never seen anyone there before. It was strange because that corner was usually empty at night. Curiosity and hunger, a powerful combination, made me drive towards the light. The spot was different. It was unnervingly quiet. Most suya spots were noisy places, full of chatter from customers, the sizzle of the meat, and the loud, booming voice of a small radio pointing out every tiny mistake. But this place was silent, except for the low hum of the coals. The man standing by the grill was tall and thin, much like Ibrahim, but he was shrouded in shadows. A long, dark kaftan and a zana cap covered most of him. The only light came from the grill itself, which cast dancing, eerie shadows on his face, making it hard to see his features clearly. Ameka parked his car and walked over. "Good evening," he said. The man didn't reply. He simply looked up from the meat he was fanning and nodded slowly. There was something odd about the nod. It was too slow, too deliberate. Ameka felt a small, strange prickle on his skin, the kind you get when you feel you're being watched, but he dismissed it as tiredness. He was too hungry to care about strange feelings. "I want to buy suya," Ameka said, stating the obvious. "How much is one stick?" The man still didn't speak. He simply raised one long, thin finger and pointed to a small, dirty piece of cardboard propped against a stone. On it was written in charcoal, 500 naira per stick. It was more expensive than Ibrahim's Suya, but Emeka was not in a position to bargain. "Okay, give me 4 sticks," Emeka said, pulling out a crisp 2,000 naira note from his wallet. The man turned back to the grill. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, his long arms fanning the coals without a sound. The smoke that rose from the grill was different, too. It didn't have the usual mouth-watering smell of roasted meat and spices. It smelled richer, darker, with an undertone of something Emeka couldn't identify. Something earthy, like the smell of wet soil after a heavy rain. As the Suya man worked, Emeka looked around. The street was deserted. The corn seller from before had packed up and left. It was just him and this silent man, alone in the middle of the night, bathed in the red glow of the fire. The silence began to feel heavy, unnatural. Emeka was a man who liked to chat. He would have asked Ibrahim about his family, about the news, about football. But this man's silence was like a wall, and Emeka didn't feel like climbing it. The man finished preparing the suya. He didn't wrap it in old newspaper like Ibrahim did. He pulled out a single, large, dark green leaf. It looked like a leaf from a banana tree, but it was darker and thicker. He skillfully wrapped the 4 sticks of meat in the leaf, then took a small string, seemingly from nowhere, and tied it neatly. He did all this without a single wasted movement. His actions were precise and silent. He handed the package to Emeka. His fingers brushed against Emeka's as he took the package. The man's skin was cold, shockingly cold, like he had just been holding a block of ice. And it was dry, almost papery. Emeka pulled his hand back quickly. He looked at the man's face, trying to see it clearly in the dim light. For a moment he thought he saw the man's eyes. They seemed to gleam in the firelight, like a cat's eyes in the dark. But it was just for a second, and then the shadow fell over his face again. Emeka handed him the 2,000 naira note. He took it, but he didn't have any change. He just stood there, holding the note, looking at Emeka. "Don't I have change?" Emeka asked, confused. The man simply shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. It was clear he was not going to give any change, and he wasn't going to explain why. A normal person would have argued. A normal person would have demanded his change back. But Emeka was not feeling normal. He felt a strange sense of dread mixed with an overwhelming urge to just leave. The hunger was still there, a ferocious beast in his belly, and the package in his hand felt hot and heavy. "Okay, keep it," Emeka rumbled, turning and walking back to his car. He felt the man's eyes on his back the entire time. He didn't look back. He got into his car, locked the doors, and quickly drove away. He glanced in his rearview mirror. The red glow from the grill was still there, a lonely point of light in the darkness, but the man was gone, as if he had melted into the shadows. Emeka shook his head, trying to clear the strange feeling. "You're just tired," he told himself. "Too much stress from work." He drove the short distance to his house, the strange encounter already fading as the smell of the suya filled his car. It smelled incredible, better than Ibrahim's, better than any suya he had ever smelled in his life. The earthy undertone was still there, but now it was mixed with the rich aroma of roasted meat and spices. He parked his car, crept into the house quietly so as not to wake Funke, and went straight to the dining table. He didn't even bother with a plate. He untied the string and unpeeled the dark leaf. The meat inside was glistening. It was cooked to perfection, with a dark, crispy outer layer but tender and juicy on the inside. The pepper was caked on thickly, just the way he liked it. He took the first bite and his eyes closed in pleasure. The taste was explosive. It was smoky, spicy, salty, and sweet all at once. The meat was so tender that it practically melted in his mouth. He had never tasted anything like it. It wasn't just food, it was an experience. The hunger that had been tormenting him for hours was finally being satisfied, and in the most glorious way possible. He devoured the first stick in seconds, then the second. He didn't even pause for a drink of water. The suya was so good, so overwhelmingly delicious, that it commanded all of his attention. He felt a strange energy surging through him with every bite, a warmth spreading from his stomach to his limbs. By the time he was on the third stick, a thought floated into his mind. He should probably save one for Funke. She loved Suya. But the thought was quickly pushed away by a powerful wave of selfishness he had never felt before. No, a voice in his head seemed to whisper. It's all for you. You deserve it. He listened to the voice. He ate the third stick, and then the fourth, licking the oil and pepper from his fingers until they were clean. He even chewed on the wooden sticks for a moment to get the last bit of flavor. When he was done, he sat back, his stomach full and content for the first time that day. He felt a deep, profound satisfaction. He bundled up the leaf and the sticks and threw them in the bin. He washed his hands, drank a glass of water, and went to the bedroom. Funky was fast asleep, breathing softly. He slipped into bed beside her, his body feeling heavy and tired, but in a good way. Sleep came for him instantly, pulling him down into a deep, dark place. His dreams were strange. They were vivid, chaotic, and unsettling. He dreamt he was running, but he wasn't running on two legs. He was on all fours, his hands and feet pounding against soft earth. He was in a thick forest, the moon hidden behind dark clouds. He could feel the wind in his fur, and the wet leaves brushing against his body. His senses were alive in a way they had never been before. He could smell everything, the smell of damp soil, the scent of a frightened rabbit hiding in a bush 100 yards away, the distant smell of a wood fire. And he could hear everything, the rustle of a leaf, the snap of a twig, the beating of his own powerful heart. He was running with a pack. He could feel the presence of others around him, dark shapes moving swiftly and silently through the trees. They were hunting. There was a feeling of wild joy, of complete freedom, of belonging to the pack, to the hunt, to the night. There was no thought, no worry, no invoices or demanding bosses. There was only instinct. Run. Hunt. Live. He woke up with a gasp. He was drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest as if he had been running a marathon. The dream had felt so real. The feeling of the ground under his paws, the taste of the air, the primal thrill of the hunt. He sat up in bed, his breath coming in short, quick pants. Funke mumbled in her sleep and turned over. The room was dark, save for the faint gray light of dawn filtering through the curtains. McKay swung his legs out of bed. His muscles ached. They were sore in a way he had never felt before, like he had used them for something they were not built for. His throat was also incredibly dry, as if he had been panting for hours. He stumbled to the bathroom, his legs feeling woozy. He turned on the tap and drank water straight from it, gulping it down greedily. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to wash away the remnants of the disturbing dream. He looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. His face was pale, and his eyes looked different. There was a strange intensity in them, a wildness he had never seen before. He leaned closer, staring into his own pupils. For a moment, he thought he saw the reflection of a forest, of dark trees under a moonless sky. He blinked, and it was gone. It was just his own tired reflection, staring back at him. He shook his head again. It was just a dream, McKay. Just a stupid dream brought on by stress and that heavy suya you ate. He tried to reassure himself, but a feeling of unease lingered, a cold knot in the pit of his now empty stomach. He felt a sudden, sharp craving. He wanted meat, raw meat. The thought was so sudden and so bizarre that it made him feel dizzy. He leaned against the sink, taking deep breaths. "Are you okay, dear?" It was Funke's voice from the bedroom. She was awake. "Yes, I'm fine," he called out, trying to make his voice sound normal. "Just had a bad dream." He walked back into the bedroom. Funke was sitting up in bed, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She smiled at him. "Good morning, my love. How was the suya? You didn't even save any for me." She said it with a playful pout. not real anger. MK felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Funke. I was just so hungry I couldn't stop myself. I'll buy you your own today, I promise." He walked towards her, wanting to give her a morning kiss. She was looking at him, her smile slowly fading, replaced by a look of confusion. "MK, what's wrong with your throat?" "My throat? It's just dry." He tried to clear his throat, but a strange rumbling sound came from deep within his chest. It felt like a growl, a low, menacing growl. He froze. Funke heard it too. Her eyes widened. "What was that?" she whispered. I don't know," MK stammered. His heart started to beat faster. The feeling of unease was now a full-blown panic. Something was wrong. Something terribly wrong. He opened his mouth to tell her that he was fine, that it was nothing, that he probably just needed some water. He wanted to say the words, "Good morning." He formed the words in his mind. He took a breath. And that's when it happened. The sound that came out was not "good morning." It wasn't a word. It was a short, sharp, woof. Silence. The sound had been so sharp, so loud in the quiet morning bedroom that it left a ringing silence in its wake. McKay and Funke stared at each other across the small space between the bed and the bathroom door. It felt like a vast canyon had opened up between them. And McKay's mind was a frantic storm of denial. It was a cough, a hiccup, a strange noise my throat made because it's dry. Any explanation, no matter how ridiculous, was better than the truth that was sitting cold and heavy in his gut. Funke's expression was a slow-motion film of disbelief. Her wide eyes were fixed on his mouth, as if she expected to see a small dog peek out. Her own mouth was slightly open, her lips parted in a silent "oh" of shock. "And McKay," she whispered, and her voice was thin, fragile. "What did you just do?" He had to fix this. He had to speak, to say something normal, to prove that the sound was a mistake. He swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat feeling tight and alien. He clamped his jaw shut, his knuckles turning white as he clenched his fists. A pained whimper escaped his lips. It was a high-pitched, pathetic sound, the kind a puppy makes when it's scared. That second sound broke the spell for Funke. Her confusion on her face curdled into pure, undiluted fear. She scrambled backwards on the bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin like a shield. "McKay," she cried, her voice now sharp with panic. "What is wrong with you? Stop it. It's scaring me." "I'm not doing anything," he wanted to shout, but the effort to speak resulted in another, more forceful sound. Woof! Ruff! It was a short, two-part bark, clear and loud. His own ears registered the sound with perfect clarity, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled back, hitting the bathroom door with a thud. This wasn't a cough. This wasn't a joke. This was real. This was happening. He looked at his hands, half expecting to see paws. They were still his hands, long-fingered and calloused from years of office work. He looked down at his body. It was still his body, but the sounds, the horrible, humiliating sounds, were also his. They were coming from inside him. He saw the terror in his wife's eyes, and desperation gave him a moment of clarity. He had to calm her down. He couldn't speak, but he could act. He held up his hands in a calming gesture, his palms facing her. He took a slow, deliberate breath. He would try again. He would spell her name, one word, Funke. He focused all his mental energy on that single word. He opened his mouth slowly. Grrr. A low growl rumbled in his chest, deep and menacing. It vibrated through his entire body. It was the sound of a guard dog warning a stranger to stay back. His own sound frightened him. He slapped both hands over his mouth, his eyes wide with horror above his fingers. He was losing control. The things inside him were taking over his voice. Funke began to cry. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but quiet, terrified tears that rolled down her cheeks. "Emma-K, please, stop this joke. It's not funny. Please, just talk to me." He shook his head frantically, his hands still clamped over his mouth. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that he was as scared as she was. But the growl that had just escaped him made him freeze. It was a sound of warning, of aggression. What if he got closer and what? Bit her? The thought was so monstrous, so insane, that he felt a renewed wave of panic. He was a monster. He was turning into a monster in his own bedroom. He backed away slowly into the bathroom and locked the door. He needed a moment. He needed to be alone with this sickness. He leaned over the sink, his body trembling. He stared at his reflection in the mirror again. It was still him, Emma-K Okoro, accountant, husband, 35 years old. But his eyes, there was definitely something wrong with his eyes. The wildness he had noticed earlier was more pronounced now. They looked haunted, hunted, and his ears felt strangely sensitive. He could hear Funke's soft sobs through the thick wooden door as if she were right beside him. He could hear the drip, drip, drip of the tap in the kitchen. He could hear the faint buzz of a mosquito flying near the ceiling. He tried to take stock of the situation. He ate Suya. He had a weird dream. Now he was barking like a dog. There had to be a logical explanation. Food poisoning? A rare allergic reaction? Maybe the meat was bad and it was causing some kind of neurological problem. Yes, that had to be it.
It was a medical issue. A strange, but explainable medical issue. This thought calmed him slightly. If it was medical, it could be fixed. A doctor could give him an injection or some pills, and this nightmare would be over. He spent what felt like an hour in the bathroom, testing himself. He would try to say simple words. Hello? Water? Help? Sometimes nothing would come out, just a choked silence. Other times, the animal sounds would burst out against his will. Barks, whimpers, growls. There was no pattern, no logic to it. It was like his vocal cords had been hijacked by another being. He discovered that if he didn't try to speak at all, he was mostly fine. The sounds only came when he attempted to use his human voice. This was both a relief and a curse. He could be silent, but he couldn't communicate. He was trapped inside his own head. Finally, he heard a soft knock on the door. Emeka? It was Funke. Her voice was shaky, but the terror had been replaced by a note of concern. Emeka, please open the door. We'll figure this out. Together. He took a deep breath and unlocked the door. Funke was standing there, her face tear-streaked and pale. She had wrapped a wrapper around her chest. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for an explanation. He could offer none. He just gave her a look of pure misery. She seemed to understand. She reached out and took his hand. Her touch was hesitant at first, then firm. It's okay, she said, though her voice trembled. We'll figure it out. The first day was a lesson in survival. They had to create a system. Emeka found an old notebook and a pen, and that became his voice. It was slow and frustrating. I think it was the Suya, he wrote. The meat was bad. She read it and nodded, clinging to the rational explanation. Yes, it must be. Some kind of food poisoning. We need to get you to a doctor. But how? The thought of going outside was terrifying. What if I barked in public? What if someone saw me? The shame would be unbearable. Port Harcourt was a big city, but it was also a small town in many ways. News traveled fast. A man who barks like a dog, he would become a freak show, a local legend for all the wrong reasons. His career would be over. Their lives would be ruined. They decided to wait a day to see if it would pass on its own. Funke called Emeka's office. Her voice was a masterpiece of controlled calm. She said, "Hello, this is Emeka's wife. He won't be able to come in today. He has a terrible case of laryngitis. He's completely lost his voice." She listened for a moment, then forced a small laugh. "Yes, completely silent. The doctor said he needs total vocal rest for a few days. Thank you. I'll let him know you called." She hung up the phone and slumped against the wall, her body shaking with relief. The first lie had been told. The wall around their secret was being built. As the day wore on, new symptoms began to appear. Emeka's sense of smell, which had felt heightened in the morning, went into overdrive. The smell of the onions Funk was chopping in the kitchen was so overpowering that it made his eyes water and his nose itch. He could smell the faintest trace of perfume on a dress she had worn 2 days ago. He could smell the rain before it even began to fall, a rich, earthy scent in the air that made something deep inside him feel excited. He also developed a terrible restlessness. He couldn't sit still. The urge to move, to pace, was overwhelming. He walked from the living room to the bedroom, back and forth, like a caged animal. He felt a strange energy thrumming under his skin, a coiled spring of power that had no outlet. His body felt different too. His joints felt looser, his muscles more elastic. He found himself unconsciously walking on the balls of his feet, a silent, predatory gait. He would catch himself doing it and force his heels back to the ground, his heart pounding with shame and fear. The worst part was the cravings. His hunger returned with a vengeance, but it was not for Eba or rice. He wanted meat. He could smell the raw chicken Funk was preparing for lunch from the other room. The scent drove him mad. It was intoxicating. He walked into the kitchen, his eyes fixed on the pink flesh of the chicken on the cutting board. He wanted to snatch it and eat it right there, raw. The urge was so powerful, so primal, that it took all his willpower to resist it. He grabbed his notebook and scribbled frantically. "The smell. It's too strong. I can't take it." Funke looked from the note to his wild eyes, which were locked on the raw chicken. Understanding dawned on her face. She quickly packed the chicken away, her hands trembling, and sealed it in a container in the fridge. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." He spent the rest of the day in the bedroom, the door closed, trying to control the strange new urges that were taking over his body. He tried to read a book, but he couldn't focus on the words. His hearing was too sharp. Every car horn from the street outside, every shout from a neighbor's house was a jarring intrusion. He felt agitated, on edge, his senses bombarded with information he couldn't process. That night, sleep did not come easily. He lay in bed, his body tense, listening to the sounds of the night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside made him want to jump up, to investigate, to patrol his territory. When he finally did drift off, the forest dream returned. This time it was more vivid, more real. He wasn't just in the pack, he was leading it. He could feel the thrill of the chase, the taste of blood in his mouth, the satisfaction of a successful hunt. He woke up with a silent howl trapped in his throat, his teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. The next morning, it was clear that this was not going away on its own. It was getting worse. His attempts to speak now resulted in a frightening variety of sounds. He was no longer just barking. He could yap, whine, and growl with alarming authenticity. They had to see a doctor. The plan was simple and humiliating. Emeka would not try to speak at all. He would have his notebook. Funke would do all the talking. They would go to a private hospital, a small clinic run by a Dr. Okoro that they had been to once before. It was expensive, but it would be discreet. Getting ready to leave the house felt like preparing for a secret mission. Funke looked at Emeka's clothes. "Maybe you should wear a scarf," she suggested, "around your neck, in case you cough. Emeka just nodded, his face a mask of misery. He felt like a leper. He wrapped a thick scarf around his neck on a hot Port Harcourt day, feeling utterly ridiculous. The car ride was tense. Emeka sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, focusing all his energy on staying silent. Every bump in the road, every car that cut them off, made him want to let out a short, angry bark. He gripped the seat, his knuckles white, fighting himself every second of the way. Dr. Okoro's clinic was clean, quiet, and air-conditioned. The waiting room was empty, for which Emeka was profoundly grateful. Funke went to the receptionist and explained the situation in a low voice. "My husband has severe laryngitis. He can't speak a single word." The receptionist nodded sympathetically and told them the doctor would see them shortly. They sat in the cold plastic chairs, not speaking, not looking at each other. Emeka could smell the antiseptic used to clean the floors, the cheap perfume the receptionist was wearing, and something else. A faint, sickly sweet smell of disease that seemed to hang in the air. The smells made him want to sneeze, and he was terrified that if he sneezed, a bark would come out with it. Dr. Okoro was a kind-looking man in his 50s with a calm demeanor. "Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, please, come in," he said, gesturing to the chairs in his office. They sat down, and Funke began her carefully rehearsed story. "Doctor, it's my husband. He woke up yesterday morning and he couldn't speak at all, not a single word." "I see," Dr. Okoro said, looking at Emeka with professional concern. He turned to Emeka. "Emeka, can you open your mouth for me, please? Let me have a look at your throat." Emeka obeyed. The doctor peered into his mouth with a small light, pressing his tongue down with a wooden stick. There's some slight redness, but nothing that would cause a complete loss of voice. Any pain? Any difficulty swallowing?" Emeka shook his head. Dr. Okoro was puzzled. He took Emeka's blood pressure and listened to his heart and lungs. Everything was normal. "Mrs. Okoro, you said this just happened suddenly." "Yes, doctor. The night before, he was perfectly fine. Then he woke up like this." Funte's voice was tight with stress. "Has he been under a lot of stress at work? Any recent trauma or shock?" "Well, his job is very stressful. His boss is very demanding." The doctor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers.
It's possible this is a case of psychogenic aphonia. It's a rare condition where a person loses their voice due to severe psychological stress or trauma. The mind essentially shuts down the ability to speak as a defense mechanism. There's nothing physically wrong with the vocal cords. Emeka wanted to scream. It wasn't a lack of voice. It was the presence of another one. He grabbed his notebook and scribbled furiously. "I can make sounds, just not words. They come out wrong." He pushed the notebook towards the doctor. Dr. Okoro read it, and his brow furrowed in confusion. "They come out wrong? What do you mean by that? Can you try to make a sound for me? Just a simple, ah?" Emeka felt a cold dread wash over him. This was it. The moment of truth. He looked at Funke, and she gave him a tiny, terrified shake of her head. But the doctor was waiting, his expression patient and curious. Emeka knew he had to try. He had to show him. Maybe the doctor would understand then. He took a deep breath, focused, and tried to make the ah sound. For a second, he thought he had it, but then he felt the pressure build, the hijacking of his own throat. What came out was not ah, it was a soft, pitiful whine. "Yeen!" Dr. Okoro blinked. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "I'm sorry, could you try that again?" Emeka tried again, this time with more force. Frustration gave him an edge. "Woof!" The sound was sharp and clear in the sterile quiet of the doctor's office. Dr. Okoro physically recoiled in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. He stared at Emeka, then at Funke, then back at Emeka. He was speechless. "That,"
he finally managed to say, his professional calm completely shattered. That was the sound of a dog. Yes, Funke whispered, her face pale. That's what happens when he tries to talk. Dr. Okoro stood up and walked over to his bookshelf, pretending to look for a book, but Emeka knew he was just trying to process what he had just heard. He came back to his desk and sat down, looking at Emeka not as a patient, but as a bizarre puzzle. This is highly unusual, he said, his voice now laced with a clinical detachment that felt colder than before. In all my years of practice, I have never seen or heard of anything like this. It could be a very rare type of neurological disorder, a tic, something akin to Tourette's syndrome, but with non-human vocalizations. He prescribed a strong sedative to calm Emeka's nerves and a muscle relaxant for his throat. He also gave them a referral. I want you to see a specialist, a neurologist, and also perhaps a psychiatrist. This could have very deep psychological roots. They left the clinic with the prescriptions and the referral slip feeling worse than when they arrived. The doctor hadn't helped. He had just put scary new names to their nightmare. Neurological disorder, psychiatrist. He had confirmed that they were alone in this. Nobody would understand. Nobody could help. That evening, the sedatives did nothing but make Emeka feel groggy and disconnected from his own body. The strange urges were still there, muted but persistent. He refused to eat the rice and stew Funke had made. The smell of the vegetables in the stew was repulsive to him. He was starving, but his body was rejecting normal food. Later that night, Funke awoke. She didn't know what had woken her, but a strange feeling of unease made her sit up. The spot beside her was empty. Emeka was not in bed. She listened. The house was silent. A sliver of moonlight cut through a gap in the curtains, illuminating a patch of the floor. She got out of bed and went to look for him. He wasn't in the living room. He wasn't in the kitchen. Then she heard a sound, a soft, rhythmic, lapping sound. It was coming from the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. Her heart began to pound. She crept towards the door and peered through the crack. What she saw made her blood run cold. Emeka was on his hands and knees on the bathroom floor. In the pale moonlight filtering through the small window, she could see that he had pulled the small plastic bowl they used for washing their feet from under the sink and had filled it with water from the tap. He was not drinking from it. He was lapping the water up from the bowl, his head bent, his tongue flicking in and out, just like a dog. The lapping sounds were quiet, efficient, and sickeningly natural. He seemed completely lost in the act, unaware that he was being watched. This was not just a man with a voice problem. This was not a man with a tic. This was a man whose very humanity was being stripped away, piece by piece. The sight of her husband, the proud, intelligent man she loved, lapping water from a bowl on the floor like an animal, broke something inside her. The last vestiges of her hope and a rational medical explanation crumbled into dust. She backed away from the door silently, her hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She went back to the living room and sank into a chair, her body trembling in the dark. This was not a sickness of the body or the mind. This was something else, something ancient and evil. Her mind raced, searching for an answer, for anything that made sense. And then it came to her, the one thing that had been different, the only strange event before this nightmare began. The Suya. The strange, silent man, the cold fingers, the meat that tasted too good to be real. She sat there in the dark for a long time. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in her stomach. But now, there was something else beside it, a tiny, flickering flame of anger and resolve. The doctors couldn't help them. Science couldn't explain this. They were on their own. She finally knew what they had to do. The answer wasn't in a hospital or a pharmacy. The answer was on that dark, lonely street corner. When Emeka finally came back to the bedroom, looking ashamed and broken, Funke was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face set with a grim determination she hadn't had before. He looked at her, expecting to see pity or disgust. Instead, he saw a fighter. She took his notebook and pen from the bedside table and wrote a single clear sentence. She underlined it twice. She showed it to him.
Tomorrow, we are going to find that Suya man.